Welcome to the first of 3 lectures on constitutions and statutes. In this first lecture, part A, we're going to focus on constitutions, how you find them, interpret them, and cite them in accordance with the Blue Book and Green Book. But first, let's set the table. You will recall that in the US legal system, there is a hierarchy of primary sources of law. And at the very top, what we're going to be talking about in this lecture are the constitutions. Below that are the statutes, and then the administrative rules and regulations, and then the case law. But we're going to be focusing on the top, the constitutions. Now, a constitution is a document that establishes the basic legal structure of a state or nation and the basic legal principles that will control the operation of the government and the conduct of its citizens. Now, a constitution is much more bare bones than statutes that the legislatures enact. The legislatures, in essence, flesh out the skeleton that is set out in the Constitution. Now, in the United States, we actually have a lot of constitutions. We have the federal or United States Constitution, of course, but every state has its own constitution. Now, even though we have all these different constitutions, the United States Constitution, that is the federal Constitution, is by its own terms the supreme law of the land. So the federal Constitution is the supreme law of the entire country. And federal courts will determine whether it has been violated. If someone has been subject to a law that that person believes violates a provision of the United States Constitution, then that person can challenge the constitutionality of that law in court. And the federal Constitution is actually very difficult to amend. There are 2 alternative ways to do this. The first one, and the one that has been used for all of the amendments that are currently in the United States Constitution, is by a joint resolution of the United States Congress on a 2/3 vote of both the Senate and the House Representatives to propose the amendment. And then if that amendment, upon being sent to the states for ratification, is ratified by at least 3/4 of the state, then the amendment will become permanent. Now, the other way, which is obviously not as well known, is by a constitutional convention called by 2/3 of the state legislatures to propose an amendment. And then if that were to occur, and then 3/4 of the states ratified it, then the Constitution would be so amended. Now, the state constitutions are the supreme law of the respective states. And in a state, usually the state's legislature or the citizens of that state can vote to amend it. Here in Texas, we have statewide general elections in which we vote on proposed amendments to the Texas Constitution. And just as federal courts will determine whether a particular law or state action violates the US Constitution, so in state court systems, the state courts will determine whether the Constitution of that state has been violated. But note that if a federal court determines that a state constitutional provision violates some provision of the United States or federal Constitution, then that court will hold that state constitutional provision invalid and unenforceable. Again, going back to the supreme law of the land status of the federal Constitution. Well, how do you find constitutions in your legal research? One way that is obvious is just get on the internet, Google it, and find some site that has the text of the Constitution you want. However, I want to point out a more legal eagle way of doing it. So let's start off with the United States Constitution. Where can you find it in legal sources that are appropriate to legal research and legal writing in the legal profession? Let's start off with print sources. The US Constitution can be found in three main print resources. The first are the companion volumes to the United States Code. Now, the United States Code is the collection of all federal statutes enacted by Congress. But there are companion volumes to that code that contain the provisions of the United States Constitution. Now, the United States Code, which is abbreviated in citation form, U.S.C., is the official government published version of the code that is published by the Office of the Law Revision Council of the United States House of Representatives. And here's a picture of the spines of some of those volumes. So this is one way that you can find the text of the United States Constitution. Another way is to look in one of the unofficial publications that contain the United States Code. The first one here is the United States Code Annotated, or USCA. Now that is an unofficial version, meaning it's not government published, that is published by instead West Publishing / Thomson Reuters. And just as with United States Code, there are companion volumes to the USCA published by West Thomson Reuters that contain the text of the United States Constitution. And so here are in photograph form, the spines of the United States Code Annotated that relate to the Constitution. And then the third source that is in print form is a second unofficial publication of the United States Code, and it is called the United States Code Service, or USCS. And this is the version of the code published by LexisNexis. And there are companion volumes in it that contain the text of the United States Constitution. Just as a reminder, the United States Constitution is not a code, but in these publications of codes, there have been added volumes that are dedicated to the Constitution, and they typically are published as a set together. So here's a picture of one volume, actually the front of the book of the United States Code Service that deals and contains part of the United States Constitution. Now, there are also online sources where you can find the text of the US Constitution, and I'm really talking apart from just getting online and Googling it and see what comes up. Of course, you have your commercial legal research online services that you have to pay for, such as Westlaw and Lexis. And so I want to start with Westlaw as an example of how you would find the text of the United States Constitution. So first, you would log into Westlaw and then go to the Westlaw homepage. So here we have the homepage, and in the All Content tab, there it is in the left-hand corner in the Browse pane. Click on Statutes and Court Rules. So there it is. If you click on it, then you will see at the very top the heading Federal. And below that heading, you will click on U.S. Constitution. And when you click on that, then you will see essentially a table of contents of the United States Constitution, organized first of all by preamble and then the various articles and then later by amendments. And so to first find the article or amendment that you're interested in, and once you find it, you'll want to click on the blue plus symbol to the left of it to expand the menu, because sometimes articles have multiple sections or clauses in them, and that will enable you to find which one exactly you're looking for. So here, I clicked on the blue plus symbol next to Article 1, which relates to the United States Congress. Once you have expanded that menu for the article, then click on the desired section or clause number. And so let's say you wanted section 1 of Article 1, and that relates to the legislative power being vested in the United States Congress. So if that's the one you're interested in, then click on it, and now you will see the actual text of that section. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. Now, on Lexis, which is another commercial legal research service similar to Westlaw, the process would be very similar to what I walked through on Westlaw. Now, there are also some free sites that have the text of the Constitution. One is Constitution Annotated at www.constitution.congress.gov. You could also go to govinfo.gov, and it will have a section with the text of the Constitution. You can also go to the Library of Congress's website, and I've got a link to that site where you can see the Constitution. Cornell Law School's Legal Information Institute, LII, which has a lot of codes and other statutes available for free to the public, also has the text of the United States Constitution. Okay, that's the US Constitution and where you can find its text. Well, what about the Texas Constitution? Well, the key print source of the text of the Texas Constitution is Vernon's Texas Constitution. And that consists of companion volumes to the book form of Texas statutes or Texas codes, which are called Vernon's Texas Codes Annotated. And these are published by West and Thomson Reuters. And here's a picture of those black bound volumes that concern the Constitution. As with United States Code or the USCA or USCS, these volumes tend to come part and parcel as companions with similar looking statutory codes called Vernon's Texas Codes Annotated. Now you can also find the Texas Constitution online on Westlaw or Lexis. And so let me show you how to find it on Westlaw as an example. So you start off the same way you would as if you were looking for the US Constitution. Log into Westlaw, go to the home page, and in the All Content tab in the Browse pane, click on Statutes and Court Rules as you did before. Now, on the Statutes and Court Rules page, you're going to want to find the heading State. So before you found the heading Federal. Well, you need to scroll down and find the heading State, and then underneath that heading, you'll see all of the names of the states, and you'll just scroll down until you find Texas and click on Texas. Then that will take you to the Texas Statutes and Court Rules page. So once you're on that page, scroll down until you see on the left the link for Constitution of the State of Texas 1876. And so if you click on that, just as with the United States Constitution, you will see an outline of the Texas Constitution, and then you can browse it and find the provision you want to read. Now, you can also find it on Lexis, of course. The Texas Constitution is available on some free internet sites. One is the Texas Constitutions and Statutes site at statutes.capitol.texas.gov. You can also go to the website of the Texas Legislative Council and find the text of the Texas Constitution there. Okay, you now know how to find these constitutions in legal sources. Now, as you probably know, the constitutions are written in a fairly bare bones way, and it has taken centuries to figure out exactly what those words mean and how they should be properly applied. This involves the task of interpreting constitutions. And of course, the supreme interpreter of the United States Constitution is the United States Supreme Court. But one thing to know, if you're ever researching a constitutional issue, first you'll want to determine whether a statute exists that actually implements the constitutional provision in the specific context you're dealing with. Because if that's the case, the statute will be what you will govern your issue rather than the language of the Constitution by itself. So, for example, if you are researching an issue relating to a client whose rights have been violated under the U.S. Constitution, you will want to try to find the federal statute enacted by Congress that affirmatively provides a cause of action for someone who has experienced that, what the burden of proof is, what the recoverable damages are, and so forth. And so here are just a few examples: the Civil Rights Act, the Equal Pay Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and so forth. You just generally, unless you have a very obscure issue, you normally don't rely on the text of a constitution by itself when you're analyzing a constitutional issue. And the reason is simply that over the course of thousands of opinions, courts, both state and federal, have interpreted and applied constitutional provisions in various contexts. So it's going to be extremely important for you to research the case law as well as statutes to that in the context that you're researching in. Now, in the federal court system, judges and justices from the U.S. Supreme Court all the way down to the United States District Courts are nominated by the U.S. President and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Now, in the Texas court system, justices all the way from the Texas Supreme Court and Texas Court of Criminal Appeals all the way down to justices of the peace are elected. Now, in theory, the judicial branch of government is not a political branch. The politics is supposed to be left to the legislative branch and the executive branch. But in recent decades, the process of nominating and confirming federal judges and justices in particular has become extremely political. Now, one reason for this politicization is the evolution of conflicting judicial philosophies that nominees to the court have adopted regarding how you interpret and apply the Constitution. So I want to set forth in admittedly oversimplified terms two conflicting and competing philosophies of constitutional interpretation. On the one hand, you have what people would tend to call the conservative view. And it's also called the textualist view or originalist view. Under this view, the Constitution means no more and no less than what it meant to those who originally framed it, wrote it, and ratified it. Now, one criticism of this view is that because of this focus on what the language meant to people in the late 18th century, that it hamstrings justices today to 18th century interpretations that some of which may no longer apply or some of which may fail to address current issues and circumstances. So that's the textualist or originalist view. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum is the living constitution view. It would be considered by some as the liberal view. Under this view, the Constitution's interpretation is not limited to how the words would have been understood by the framers and those who originally ratified it, but instead the language should be interpreted in light of current times, culture, and society. Well, there's a criticism of this view as well. Critics of this view argue that it opens the door to judicial activism and, quote, legislating from the bench, unquote. That means that it opens the door to enable courts to actually make or change laws instead of simply interpreting and applying them, and thereby usurping the lawmaking powers that the Constitution has granted elsewhere, such as to the United States Congress. So, but again, this is a very oversimplified binary view of judicial philosophy when it comes to the Constitution, but it does help explain to some degree the heightened politicization of federal court appointee and the confirmation process today. Now, as I mentioned, when you are researching a constitutional issue, you want to see if there is a statute that implements those constitutional terms and allows someone to sue and so forth. And you will also want to know how the courts have interpreted or applied the particular provision that you're interested in. So how do you find cases that in which courts have interpreted or applied a particular provision of the Constitution? Well, for the federal Constitution, there are treatises and hornbooks on constitutional law. Treatises are normally multi-volume, very scholarly works written by very well-known law professors who are experts in constitutional law. A hornbook is usually a one-volume, less scholarly work, but does have a tendency to be helpful in that it simply summarizes basic principles of constitutional law. And so sometimes these can be the best place to start. If you have access to one, there are certain treatises that are available on Westlaw or Lexis, or if you're in a law library, most likely you'll have at least one of them. So this sometimes is a good place to start. You can look up the index and find the particular provision you're looking for, and then the particular issue or nuance about that provision, and then see what the authors have to say about it. Here are two examples of well-known, first a hornbook that is by Nowak and Rotunda called Hornbook on Constitutional Law. And here is another resource by Fisher and Herriger, American Constitutional Law. Now, another place you can find cases that interpret the U.S. Constitution are the annotations or citing references regarding the provisions in question that are contained in these resources. In the United States Code Annotated, that is published by West/Thomson Reuters, in addition to having the text of the Constitution, it also prints head notes or abstracts or summaries of the court decisions that have come out, whether it's U.S. Supreme Court on down, treating that particular provision. So that's a very helpful resource. You can get the United States Code Annotated in print form, but if you have Westlaw, that is the form of the United States Code and the United States Constitution that's on Westlaw. Now, same type of of benefit in the United States Code Service, the USCS, which will contain annotations, that is, summaries, head notes from, not necessarily head notes, but summaries and abstracts from cases that have interpreted or applied the particular provisions of the Constitution. And that is in print form. And if you have Lexis, then the United States Code Service will be available on Lexis. Now, if you have a citator, such as Shepard's United States Citations, then this is the citator that will allow you to look up provisions of the Constitution and see a list of cases that have treated or cited that particular provision. There's a print version, and then if you have Lexis, you can get it on Lexis. The parallel feature on Westlaw is called KeyCite, and I'll show you an example of how that works in just a second. Also, if you have the United States Supreme Court Digest, either in print or on Westlaw, you can look up a constitutional issue and then see headnotes from all of the published cases that have addressed that particular topic or subtopic relating to the constitutional provision in question. Finally, there are the American Law Reports, or ALR, a secondary source which is very helpful, consisting of articles written that will usually on cutting edge topics of all different types of areas of law, but including constitutional law as well. And if you have the federal version of American Law Reports, then it will include issues of federal constitutional law. Now, there is a site online for free called Constitution Annotated, as I mentioned earlier. It's at constitution.congress.gov, where you can see not only the text of the Constitution, but also information about cases that have cited or interpreted or applied the provision you're interested in. Okay, so let's look at how you would find cases interpreting a provision of the U.S. Constitution on Westlaw. So you would pull up the particular provision of the Constitution you're interested in. So I'm going to go back to Section 1 of Article 1 that we looked at earlier about legislative power being vested in the United States Congress. So once you have the constitutional provision pulled up, you will want to click on the phrase notes of decisions, that is citing references, that is other cases or cases in which courts have cited this particular provision. Now there will be two places on the screen where you can click on this phrase. One is a KeyCite tab at the top. You can click there, or underneath the text of the Section 1, you can click there as well. Now, when you do, you will see that because there are so many cases that have cited Article 1, Section 1, that Westlaw's editors have first organized all of those cases according to the particular subtopic or subtopic about Section 1 that they treat. And so the first thing you'll see is a topical outline of those references so that you can browse the outline, and then once you've found the particular nuance that you're interested in, click on the number next to that subtopic, and it will then jump you to the headnotes from the cases that treat it. So here is your topical outline. And then if you want to, instead of jumping down to a particular set of head notes based on topic, you can just scroll down till you get to the end of the topical outline, and then you'll see where all of the head notes begin. Now they're still going to be organized according to the outline, And if you want to, you can scroll down and browse them. But in any event, you'll see these are headnotes that would appear at the head of the case in West published case reporters. And they also have the link and the name of the case. In case you want to read it, you just click on the name and the case will pull up. Now, what about the Texas Constitution? How do you find cases interpreting it? Well, you can find annotations, that is, summaries of cases that have addressed a particular provision in the Vernon's Texas Constitution, that is the print version, that is a companion to the Vernon's Texas Codes annotated. And again, you just flip to the provision you are interested in, and then below the text will be a list of abstracts or summaries of cases that have addressed, interpreted, or applied the particular provision. Again, Westlaw key cite tabs, just what we walked through with respect to cases interpreting the US Constitution. You do the same thing if you pull up a section of the Texas Constitution on Westlaw. Just click on Notes of Decisions and you're off to the races in the same way. If you have the Citator Shepherd's Texas Citations, either in print form or if you have Lexis, it will be there. That is another way that you can, it will pull up the provision and then find out it'll tell you what cases have cited that particular provision. Okay, well, speaking of citing, the last topic I want to address quickly is when you are citing a US constitutional provision or a Texas constitutional provision in your legal writing, what is the proper blue book or green book form, respectively, to do that? So that brings us to more blue book and green book fun. Start off with the United States Constitution. And this format is governed by Blue Book, White Pages, Rule 11. So if you are citing the preamble, here is the Blue Book form. U period, S period, space, const, C-O-N-S-T period with the C capitalized, space, and then the abbreviation of preamble, which is lowercase p, M, B, L period. If you're citing an article to the US Constitution, then it will be the same for US const as before, only now you will abbreviate the word article as ART period, and you do not capitalize the A. You hit the space bar, and then the article number is a Roman numeral. So here it's Roman numeral 1. And if you are going on, if you're citing a particular section or clause of an article, then you'd put a comma after the article number, space, and then the section symbol, which looks like a squiggly, 2 S's superimposed, space, and then with an Arabic numeral, you'll indicate the section number. And if you want to further narrow it to a particular clause, then you will put a comma after the section number, space, little cl period, space, and then an Arabic number for the clause. So that is how you cite an article. Well, what about an amendment to the US Constitution? Well, it starts off as the others do, US const, but the abbreviation of amendment is amend, all lowercase letters, ending with a period, and amendment numbers are Roman numerals. So here we're looking at amendment, the 14th Amendment, which is XIV in Roman numerals. And if you want to further specify a section in the amendment, because some amendments do have multiple sections, then you'll put a comma after the Roman numeral amendment number, space, section symbol, space, and then an Arabic number for the section number. So that's how you cite the United States Constitution under the Blue Book. Well, how do you cite the Texas Constitution under the Green Book? This format is governed by Green Book Rule 9.1, and it's very similar to the Blue Book format. You start off with text, T-E-X, period, space, and then const, as with the federal Constitution, capital C and O-N-S-T, period, space, and then art, if it's an article, little A-R-T, period. Article numbers are Roman numerals, so here it's 3. So you have 3 I's, capital I's, comma, and if you have a section number, then you hit the space bar, section symbol, space bar, and then Arabic numeral for the section number and any subsection designation. Here, the example is section 5, subsection A. You would just put Arabic numeral 5, parentheses open, little a, parentheses closed. So that is how you cite the Texas Constitution. So that brings us to a close on part A of our look at constitutions and statutes, and I thank you for listening.